Greetings, leaders. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Leadership Is Podcast. I am your host, Jason Muhammad. In this episode, we'll be concluding the 3 parts of 3 keys for leaders to build influence. And this episode is entitled Building Impactful Relationships. Greetings, leaders. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Leadership Is Podcast. This week, we're going over the 3rd part or the final installment of the 3 keys for leaders to build influence, which is building impactful relationships. Relationships are delicate, right? And they're very important. However, the impactful relationships are even that much more delicate and important due to the fact that you're striving to make impact. When you're making impact, there's an aim that you're going after when you're making impact. And how you achieve that aim, or AIM, is you have to affect others, influential, and motivates change. That's what the aim and impact actually means. When you're aiming to make an impactful relationship, that aim stands for it affects others, it's very influential, and it motivates change. Anything of impact affects others, it's influential, and it motivates change. Now, when you're making an impactful relationship that is on a positive note, then that is what we call a win-win, simply meaning that it's mutually beneficial. In order for you to ultimately achieve the impactful relationship, you have to give of yourself as a leader. It starts with you. You have to lead the process, right, of giving of yourself first. Patrick Lencioni has in his book, and we've talked about it in several episodes, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And he talks about the first distrust is actually, the first dysfunction is actually the lack of trust. Right? Not trust that if I fall back, someone's going to catch me, but it's a vulnerability trust. It's a type of trust that I can't be transparent as a leader. And so not being transparent, really produces the lack of integrity within your leadership style. And so you want to be one that's striving to be transparent. It doesn't mean that you have to, walk in the office just butt naked, right? But in a sense, you do want to walk in the office, transparent, meaning that what they see, right, is ultimately what they get, but you want to show the best side of you, of what they see, right? And so we talked about SEE before, and we'll talk about it some more in the future in depth. However, what followers want to see in a leader is one that is transparent, one that is trustworthy. Gallup did a poll, and also DDI did a poll, right? And they talked about how 65% of workers would do away with their salary in order to change their boss. Like those are some staggering numbers. 65% would trade in their salary to trade in their boss, or would give up their salary to trade their boss. See, I remember hearing a TED Talk someone did, and it talked about how Benjamin Franklin said there are 2 things that are constant in life. That's death and taxes. And then he added the other thing, which was a bad boss, right? So bad bosses are inevitable in companies, in agencies, organizations, right? However, if you don't want to be in that statistic as a bad boss, then you want to practice the art of building impactful relationships that are positive, which means that they're a win-win. So I read this book by the name of Amplified Leadership. And this book was written by Dan Reeland, who's one of the pastors, coach and executive pastor of a church there. And the foreword of this book was written by none other than John C. Maxwell. And the book is Amplified Leadership: 5 Practices to Establish Influence, Build People, and Impact Others for a Lifetime. In this book here, he has it on page 9. He says, connect at the heart. Connect at the heart. And he says, as a leader, I want to find a person's heart as quickly as I can. The most certain way to do this is to give my heart first, but it's not always that easy. He says, I'm sure there have been times when you just couldn't connect with someone. No matter how hard you tried, you couldn't find the real person inside. In these situations, one of two things was probably in play. Either the person was intentionally keeping you out, or you needed to increase your ability to create connection as a leader. And sometimes it's a little of both. Whatever the case, is up to you as the leader to take the initiative. So take the initiative is to give your heart first. Within giving your heart, right? When you're giving your heart, you got to save room in your heart for error and for growth. Mistakes of the person that you're actually talking to and building an impactful relationship with, you have to save room in your heart for that. And you also have to save room in your heart for growth. And you have to give your heart first. What does this mean, your heart? Well, at the heart of every leader is that leader's vision, that leader's passion, that leader's core values. And of course, that's all defined in the mission statement of that company. So you got to give your heart first. You got to give, how your passion first. And then in order for you to receive that back in a win-win situation or a positive impact, you got to be authentic. You have to save room for growth and mistakes. And so for something, you have to give something. In other words, you have to save room in your heart for forgiveness. I hope this makes sense to you. You have to save room in your heart for forgiveness. With forgiveness, it doesn't mean you overlook error. It means that you have room in your heart to allow the opportunity for growth to take place in building that impactful relationship. And what that does is that connects at the heart and it increases your connection. So in building a relationship of impact, and an impact, of course, has an aim, and that aim is to affect others, be influential, and motivate change. With that aim, right, how you're going to build it is, I'm going to deal with a acronym here for the word build. I'm going to use the word build as an acronym, and I'm going to talk about what that means. So the letter B, means to be an attentive listener. Be an attentive listener. When you're building relationships of impact, there are going to be conversations. It's inevitable. Conversations are a part of building impactful relationships, right? Conversations are that's how you build them, right? With communication and conversations. So being an attentive listener means that you pay attention, you suspend judgment, and you ask mirror questions. What is a mirror question? Well, a mirror is that which reflects. So if you're going to be asking mirror questions, you're going to ask questions that reflect that you are acknowledging the conversation, you're following the conversation, right? You're competent of the content that is being given in the conversation. And of course, you are sincerely paying attention and you understand the conversation. So be an attentive listener. The you in the word build means you understand empathetically. In other words, empathy, also known as emotional intelligence. You have to have emotional intelligence when you are building a relationship of impact. Emotional intelligence simply means it's the capacity to control one's emotions. Now, this does not necessarily, is not just confined to you, right? It does mean that when something is frustrating you, you have to contain that frustration or know how to reroute that frustration. If something is making you joyful, right, you have to learn how to, when you're building relationships of impact, You got to know how to express that joy without seeming so emotional, right? And so you have to learn how to contain that or control that emotion. But then not only that, as emotional intelligence, but now you have to understand the emotions of the person that you're talking to. What emotion are they displaying during this conversation? And pay attention to what caused that emotion. And so if it is one of pleasure, then magnify that, right? If it is one of displeasure, then you want to decrease with that type of conversation. I remember reading in the book by Sherry Torres, Conversations Worth Having. And she says that there are really two types of, they're broken down into two areas, right? They're appreciative conversations, and then there's depreciative conversations. And so appreciative conversations are those that are of value, right? They increase the likelihood that a person is going to want to continue having this conversation with you, and it produces conversations worth having. But then when you are having depreciative conversations, these are ones that are so critical, right? Even pugnacious or argumentative a little in nature. They drain the energy from the conversation of wanting to build what sparked the conversation. So you want to pay close attention as to what type of conversations that you are having, and that is done through emotional intelligence, the capacity to control one's emotions. Pay attention to what's happening within that conversation. Okay, so now the I in the word build means to insulate with trust. Insulate with trust. The word insulate simply means helps to prevent the loss of something or the intrusion of something. So when you're in a house and you have your heat on, the insulation helps to stop some of the heat from getting out, which keeps the temperature right where you want it to be at whatever temperature you set it for. But if you're in a recording booth, right, this insulation stops the intrusion of outside sound from coming in. So if you want to insulate this impactful relationship, the building process, you want to insulate it with trust. Right. Again, as we talked about, Patrick Lencioni talking about the 5 dysfunctions of a team, you want to insulate this relationship with trust. OK, you want to insulate it with trust. Trust that's not I'm going to fall back, not only because you do want to have that type of trust, too, that, once you're building this impactful relationship, that this relationship is going to lead to a win-win or a mutual beneficial, where if something is slack in your part, this person or this agency or this department even will have your back or can back you up. You do want that type of trust as well. However, this type of trust we're talking about is that which Patrick Lencioni talks about, which is vulnerability trust or transparency. You want to be transparent when you're building your impactful relationship. Hey, listen, we're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we'll finish up. Thank you so much. Greetings, leaders. I'm here to talk to you about Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone and or computer. Now, how convenient is that? Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast, too, with no minimum listenership. So it's everything that you need to make a podcast in one place. So do me a favor. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. I look forward to seeing the greatness within you. Thank you very much, leaders, for your patience and coming back with us. So, as we have talked about the BUI in the word build, as we're talking about still the 3 keys for leaders to build influence, and this is part 3, building impactful relationships. We're going to continue this. So the L that's in the word build means to learn and leverage. Learn and leverage. Learn means, you want to learn the likes, the dislikes, the triggers, both positive and negative. What do those triggers look like? Right. And so now remember, you want to understand empathetically, which means that once you discover what those triggers are, you have to use emotional intelligence. Don't be so overjoyful or emotional once you find out that they like something. However, once you find out what that trigger is, that triggers the emotion in them, that something that they like, then you want to kind of stay in that vein, but don't remain in that vein for the entirety of the conversation. But you want to drive more points in that way to build up more joy in them, right? Because you got to keep in mind, the brain is motivated by two things, and that is joy and pleasure. And so if you can learn and then leverage, right, what you're learning from this conversation with this person, and then you can continue to build an impactful relationship. Remember, impact simply means when you're building something of impact, the aim of an impactful relationship, AIM, is to just simply affect others, be influential, and motivate change. That's the aim of impact or an impactful relationship. It is to affect others, influential, and motivates change. So in the L in the word build is you're learning and you're leveraging. You're learning the likes and the dislikes. You're learning the triggers, both positive and negative, right? And then you're leveraging that. You want to make this conversation a win-win conversation. Even if the person you're talking to is saying something that you don't necessarily like, right? But again, if you're leveraging the dislikes and the likes and the using emotional intelligence, you can simply say, I respect that. Right? You're being heard. I'm not going to just ignore what you're saying or your point of view. No, I respect that. I hear you. See, what that does is that's leveraging even the negative spirit that you may feel in this conversation, right? You're leveraging it. And so then the last one here, the D in the word build, is you decide your MOR or mode of relationship, right? So again, in this COVID-19 era, we're dealing with the coronavirus or whatnot. It has limited our face-to-face interactions with people, with, of course, the 6 feet social distancing that is taking place. It's kind of limited our meetings with people in public areas. And so these search engines, right, and some of these engines, whatever they are, they're gaining some great momentum as it relates to SEO or search engine optimization. They're gaining a lot of momentum here, right? For instance, even with the other digital platforms such as Zoom and Google, Google has one as well. They're gaining a lot of momentum in this COVID-19 era. So in order for you to research the background of someone, you got to use these digital platforms more now than ever. You used to could have a conversation with a person, sit down and have a conversation with the person and kind of discover that using, discernment and what have you. However, that's not as easy nowadays as it used to be. But eventually, if you're going to build a relationship of impact, you're going to have a physical conversation with this person, whether it be over a Zoom call or it's over the telephone or what have you, or Skype. However your method is, you're going to eventually have a conversation with them, and you're going to have multiple conversations with them when you're building a relationship of impact. However, you decide your MOR, which is your mode of relationship. Simply meaning that, is this going to be a relationship of personal, or is it going to be a relationship of business, right? And so if you're going to have a personal relationship, you may say, well, I don't really necessarily want to do business with this person. Their business model is not one that I really want to align myself up with as it relates to my money, my company resources and time. However, I like this person. So, I can establish a somewhat, a personal relationship with them. And then on the other hand, You may know this person and or this, this company or agency will say, well, listen, I don't necessarily like them personally, but man, they have a fantastic business model. They're very resourceful, right? The quality of their products or services is one that definitely aligns up with the aims and visions and core values of my company. So I definitely want to have a business relationship with them. So you decide your MOR or your mode of relationship, whether it's going to be business or personal. However, if you're not going to practice the art of being one of authentic integrity, you're going to produce a barrier within your relationship, whether it is personal or business. You're going to produce a barrier, right? And so these barriers, when you have the lack of integrity, that leads to the lack of trust, which multiplies the lack of team synergy and leads to conflict and team corrosion. So if you're building a team, right, and whenever you're trying to connect with someone, I've talked about this before in my book, Leadership is 10 Principles of Success for the First-Time Manager. And I talked about what is called WIN, right? WIN. That's you have a winning attitude. And it also talks about how you negotiate, right? And I referred to the mating rituals of elephants and how elephants woo. The female elephants, right? The male elephants woo the female elephants, and they get into this whole mating ritual and practice, right? And so that's how it is when you're building a relationship of impact. There are wooing practices, that you go through, and in every relationship, right, there are 4 seasons in every relationship. The same way it is with nature, there are 4 seasons in every relationship. I want to read something to you from this book that I read, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, on page 112 in this book, right? And so this book was written, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, A New Paradigm for Sustainable Success, by Jim Dethimer, Diana Chapman, and Kaylee Warner Klemp, right? And so they talk about in this book, they say, in a relationship, we develop judgments, beliefs, and perspectives about other people. People do things that we label good or bad. We like what they do or we don't. These labels or judgments are the normal work of the brain in relationships and life. For example, we judge colleagues as smart, capable, hardworking, analytical, team-oriented, etc. We also judge them as weak, selfish, political, dull, manipulative, disrespectful, underperforming, etc. Both lists go on and on. In unconscious below-the-line relationships, we develop these judgments, believe they are right, and withhold them from the person we've judged. Look, you don't want to be that. That's not going to build a win-win impactful relationship. That's going to build a negative impactful relationship, because that is definitely going to affect others. It's definitely going to be influential, and it's going to motivate change, because that's the aim of impact, or that's the aim of an impactful relationship, is to affect others, be influential, and motivate change. Now, you want to look at whether you want to do that positively or negatively. If you do that in a positive way, what happens is that you produce a win-win relationship. But if you do it negatively, what it does is, with the lack of integrity, that leads to lack of trust, which multiplies the lack of team synergy, which leads to conflict and team corrosion, right? And so that will be seen and manifested more than ever in the 4 seasons of every relationship. So let's talk about these 4 seasons in every relationship as we conclude this podcast. There is spring, which is the infatuation and interest, right? As a man or as a woman, you see someone that you're very interested in as beautiful or handsome, right? Very attractive. And you say, wow, your hair, your eyes, I just love, X, Y, and Z, whatever it is that you are attracted to in this person, right? You say you're infatuated with them. It is very interesting. It is very attractive to you. And then as time goes on, you're building a relationship with this person, right? Now, that's from a personal relationship. You can even use that in a business perspective, right? When you're looking at a company that you're actually some people are trying to acquire, some people are trying to actually partnership with. You like the product. You're infatuated by the plastics that this company uses, right? Or the services that this company uses, the resources that this company uses to develop its infrastructure. You're infatuated by that. And then the summertime, which is the next season, which is the maturation, or it matures, right? And this simply means you're now in a commitment. You're committed to this relationship. You're committed to this department, to this person, right? And you say, well, there's no one for me but you. Right? Yeah, I love you. I can't see no other person, right? The same way it is in business. I'm committed to you. I'm not going to subcontract another company or even your competitor to fulfill this fulfillment here, because I'm in a commitment with you. Okay? Now, but here's the fall, the third season, the fall. The fall is the evolution of the relationship, right? Now the relationship is evolving. Now you're starting to see what are called the differences. You're starting to pay closer attention, right? And this is producing negotiations within, right? Within the relationship. You're starting to, as a personal relationship, you say, well, why do you squeeze the toothpaste in the middle? Why do you stack your socks this way? Why do you do X, Y, and Z? Why didn't you do X, Y, and Z? So now here comes the pointing out the differences. In a business wise, it would be the same way. Well, I thought we had this measurement of plastic. I thought we had this measurement of paper. I thought we were using this type of material for this. When did you decide to make the change? Or why does this pattern not look the same as it did when we had our spring, summer, when we had, those patterns going out? So you start negotiating, and then here is the winter time, right? So the winter time is basically when you at a standstill, and now you're making a decision. Right now, you're negotiating whether you're going to make a decision about staying in this relationship or not. I don't really like this. You guys changed up your method of what it was that you were doing without conversating, without communicating with us. Yes, you are your own business, but now we're in a partnership, right? And so you can't just change up your product that we're depending on, that we sell, right? To go out into the public, and we don't know anything about this, or dealing with a relationship with male or female, or however, whatever way you go, right? With this relationship that you have with a personal relationship, you will say, well, hey, listen, why did you stop communicating with me? Why did you stop? And when a person stops talking to you, they're harboring, right, a lot of thoughts about what they want to do in this relationship. They're harboring a lot of feelings, right? This is where in the 15 commitments of conscious leadership, where they're talking about that they're harboring these feelings, but are not telling you what they feel. See, they're not showing or practicing authentic integrity, first of all, with themselves. And then second of all, with this relationship that they entered into, that they said that they were committed in, right? And so what that is doing is that lack of integrity leads to lack of trust, which multiplies lack of team synergy, which leads to conflict and destroys team or leads to conflict and team corrosion. Okay, so those are the barriers, and those what happen. You will see them more than ever as it relates to the 4 seasons of every relationship. So if you're going to build a relationship of impact, you have to practice integrity, and you have to connect at the heart You have to have room for forgiveness, and you increase your connection. And you increase your connection again by build, BUILD. That is to be an attentive listener, understand empathetically, insulate with trust, learn and leverage, decide your MOR. Greetings, leaders. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Leadership Is Podcast and the conclusion of our 3-part series of 3 keys for leaders to build influence. And this episode was entitled Building Impactful Relationships. Again, as I've stated in all of my podcasts, that I use acronyms to not change your vocabulary, but to expand your dictionary. And in this episode, we use the word build, BUILD, which talks about being an attentive listener, understand empathetically, insulate with trust, learn and leverage, decide your MOR. And MOR simply means your mode of relationship. And that means if it's going to be a business or a personal relationship. And so you can visit our website at www.jmleadershipconsult.com. We also have a Facebook page, JM Leadership Consulting, and within the bio of that, you can take an assessment. It's a self-defeatist mindset assessment to see where you are, and it's specifically geared towards employees. And so it will be a great benefit if your company could adapt this assessment for your employees to see what type of mindset that they actually have, if it's a growth mindset or a self-defeated mindset, right? You can also visit us on our Instagram page, which is JM Leadership Consulting, and then our Twitter, which is, you can follow us on Twitter at Leadership JM. So listen, thank you so much for following this podcast on anchor.fm/JM Leadership, or Leadership Is, pardon me. We are so grateful for the opportunity to serve you with these leadership principles, and we're going to continue bringing more and more tips for you coming from my book, Leadership Is 10 Principles of Success for the First-Time Manager, and other books and resources as well. So always keep in mind that leadership is influence and service.